Thank you for clicking play on me. I'm rusty after having literally been on an island for 2 years. This talk wasn't intended as a drinking game, but every time I say quote or make a parenthetical or tangent, please don't take a shot. It's great this is being recorded and I get to try new fancy things and talk as fast as I'd like, because with the playback controls, you can make me talk as slow as Tim Cook's drawl if you'd prefer. 15 minutes, here we go. Throwing the premise right up front, we're going to cover what standards compliance is like in general, things to consider, techniques to apply, and traps to be on the lookout for when approaching the mountain of specifics to potentially implement, and finally, some fun, with ways to audit the compliant state yourself with OS Query. Just like many of my air quotes questions after other people's conference talks are actually statements, prepare yourself for a rant about being audited. Now, it wouldn't exactly be nice for an attendee to be ranted at for 15 minutes straight necessarily, though, so I'm hoping to instead appear as an ombudsman or journeyman CTO and still get away with not sounding full of myself, but the challenge for me is to provide practical, actionable guidance about approaching the tasks required to meet compliance with CIS, or Center for Internet Security's controls or standards, with a workstation scope and Mac concentration. And don't worry, you can lower your alert level from guarded. I'm not going to rant about the fact that there are standards in the first place, or most of what they chose versus other regulations. It's too easy to pick on common denominator things like ITIL, ITIL, the IT infrastructure library. I actually respect book learning in general, and vendor certifications and purportedly level playing fields, so managers can get a better idea that someone took a test and self-identified as being at least interested in a field. But we have to be doing all this hardening crap for a reason. I get out of bed excited to do this work, to take pride in what I do, and take actions based on logical thought, and doing things to the best of my ability. And doing so in terms of compliance starts with agreeing on your threat model. I'm personally grateful not to be in a regulated industry or government-related organization, because then it would be just a very binary on-off thing that's boring and restrictive. I'm happier to be able to debate what's important to my org, and how seriously your organization takes sticking to warranted compliant behavior can entirely be judged by the resources you're provided, the planning you invest, and the actions you take and prioritize. One of the more obvious and humorous adages are, if you take the Center for Internet Security controls and apply 100% of them, or misapply certain ones, your coworkers will have 0% productivity or motivation. It will not result in usable computers. So there has to be a balance that makes sense, and some things will be non-negotiable under certain contexts. You have to set off the independent thought alarm. Just because I'm going along with digesting these controls and designing, engineering, and orchestrating their rollout doesn't mean I'm going to outsource my brain and blindly ship baseless crap. And it's not just SEC I'm pointing fingers at. Your tools need organizational structure awareness to provide exceptions and tailoring to the appropriate slices of the user base where applicable. So IAM, or your directory services team, needs to be working in concert with decision makers throughout the process. Most of us would easily advocate for some of the more sensible or table stakes seeming controls. I just want to resurface the nugget of knowledge Josh Weisenbaker, aka Max Home, put in the Mac Enterprise mailing list forever ago, which is fences, not walls. Consider allowing people an out where they can evade your control and just monitor violations. I added my own adage to AFP 548 forever ago with the tenet that we should audit as a distinct, separate step from remediation. I should know remediation actions are definitely warranted, and shouldn't be absolutely certain in how I'm applying things to avoid improperly locking out a device of acceptable usability with great power and all that. Simply put, especially for some of the harder ones to implement, I should have some guarantees about the state of a device before gauging if I've accurately, quote, remediated it. These CIS standards are actually very benign, that, as you can see in this example, there's specifics on what they're telling you to do, literally a rationale for why to apply the control, and impact verbiage to help you gauge if you want to prioritize any particular restriction for your organization. The biggest secret of things like risk registers you may have heard of is, Auditors just want to know what you chose, how close you got to your acceptable risk level, and why you didn't choose the rest. The CIS guidance in each section continues with separate recommendations on how to audit the state and implement the control. Not a bad story all in all on paper, but in the words of Pee Wee Herman, there's always a big but, the biggest missing part of an IT team saying they'll ratchet up the security of an environment is the red team proving that exploitation vectors are real and confirming the criticality or trivial nature of potential compromise. Unfortunately, none of us can keep valuable security personnel on staff for long, especially not Mac-savvy ones, and outsourcing that is like having your CEO as a contractor, or as my significant other once said, can't wait until we have our first intern president of the United States. As a further parenthetical, there's also a but, that if you're a company making software that ships to a place called, quote, production, however the sausage of your particular product is made, having to go through the audit at the same time, sharing senior leadership's attention, will muddy the waters and invite orthogonal comparison when the stakes should clearly be different. Only you can prevent forest fires and fight for a reasonable threat model for your org and the things that you are responsible for in your role. From a CPE Mac DevOps for Workstations perspective, if you're post-implementation measuring what you achieved and you want to stay naive, definitely feel free to assume you've checked the box and don't go through the extra effort to employ tools actually examining the attack surface you're trying to make impervious to holes for compliance. Perfect in that case is to just audit that you delivered the config profile with a subset of things that the MDM spec and framework officially manages, and pay no attention to the fact those are often unintentionally set once states that have more loopholes than a cat's cradle. I repeated a pronouncement of mine that you should audit separately from remediation. Another truism, according to me, is you can't fix problems that you can't reliably prove exist. Intermittent errors are anathema to happy IT people. But this goes back to our threat model talk, that there has to be a real detriment that we're trying to minimize, if not eliminate. And if you're exercising a side effect instead of the actual moving part, you're doing it wrong. Chaos Monkey QA style is to literally exercise the moving part, like Nate Walk did forever ago with FileVault 2 and found out there was a memory leak, that if you rotated a key more than a set number of times in an uptime session, it literally stops working. I think there's a special SANS badge if you ransomware DDoS crypto lock your own devices in pursuit of proving you're secure. Anyway. We can't actually avoid exercising the side effect in all cases, because Apple. On iPadOS, there is no compliance agent we can run, and on macOS with stuff as basic as software update, Apple, aka the homicidal goofy meme, has said, I'll effing do it again. We cannot get better, and we have to trust as much as we push out will eventually be properly quality assured by the trillion-dollar platform vendor we do free QA for. Their promises going into Monterey that they'd Sherlock nudge were totally unfounded. It was worth as much as we pay Tier 0, aka the end users, to wait for bootstrapping at DEP deploy time and multi-gigabyte 20-plus minute OS point upgrades. We have to accept the inconsistency and lossiness of the current and future reality and move on. Now, we've now reached the end of the just snark section. I have to discard with aloof pronouncements that everyone else is doing it wrong and say both what to do and how to do it right. The last time I presented at MacDevOps, 5 years ago, I used this graphic and it really drives home how sysadmins and SRE DevOps adjacent folk really should think foundationally about supporting a technically complex environment. Can you deliver what you have reliably? That's table stakes, so I really want anyone put in the situation of having to confirm compliance with controls for auditors to think about how do you judo the tasks into how you'll do your job better, not legal, or risk, or incident response, not red team or blue team. How will you get workstations to be more resilient before being concerned with making them less, quote, vulnerable? And you see the word protect on this slide a lot. The other thing you need to protect is your attention, because out of the entire list of the secure config section I showed one screenshot of before, that was just one over 2 dozen, just under the 5th heading. And the entire set of controls, which to my eye are in no particular order, You have to choose your own adventure and turn to page 68 to find out if you were eaten by a GRU when you have a specific Linux distro. The vendor you're using to satisfy a control requirement, for whatever reason, doesn't want to fulfill their promises for looking at you, Palo Alto. And that's the current CIS version 7 we've been working on for going on about 2 years. So, we'll do it all again for version 8. Now, I'm going to get prescriptive and go full on with advice. Under-promising / assuming more risk to start is a good thing, and it's smartest to think about an incremental software release model to continuously improve your control adherence so that both there's less to QA at any particular junction, and by batching a smaller amount of changes together, it's easier to boil the ocean and the frog and all the metaphors. Both the users having things locked down and the help desk that are your first responders when your auditing wasn't up to snuff or corner cases were too numerous are going to appreciate not being flooded with info or changes. You don't want to spread your response too thin with big bangs. It's the same as sharding any other rollout. When combing over what to do with the stakeholders, you'll be like the director or producer of a movie with a lot of actions to evaluate. So you should be stressing the questions of, is it really worth it? Is it actually helpful security posture-wise? Can you afford it with the resources your organization has at its disposal? And that's most applicable in terms of exceptions that will potentially be requested, and having a mechanism to allow and apply that on demand, because that's way different than just locking a thing down. And in all of this, you have to keep your promises to yourself in advance of communicating the deployment, that you know for yourself why you're doing it, and record them publicly for your org. You need run books and tickets tracking the things you're doing, or you will not be able to put the genie back in the bottle, unless your deployment style is more release the magic smoke. Now, if you ever wanted to happen upon a chance to prove that GitOps workflows and I guess Ruby scripting are worthwhile, an audit extinction level event is near purpose-built to help you understand why configuration management is designed the way it is, and its importance because a lot of places are finding that Chef or Puppet, or if Python is your bag, Ansible, or SaltStack are the purpose-built tooling for delivering compliance and defining states like drift, as these are the terms auditors want you to speak in. Getting good at these tools, funnily enough, leads you to understand how necessary and difficult orchestration is at any type of scale. So even pushing a pile of cash across the table to a vendor like Puppet or whoever doesn't address all of the tooling you end up needing to make this happen. Transitioning is an equally important and difficult case to code for. Also realize, as you determine the sheer volume of new systems to stand up and mix together, you are actively adding to tech debt that will come due, on top of existing systems and docs actively degrading and needing maintenance, and the other small organizational and engineering fires that just aren't hot enough yet. It will negatively affect your team's motivation if you let systems they built and want to see maintained get submerged while you start kicking out the jams, all hands on deck to get controls out the door. To be less vague and transition into the guts of CIS version 7, 2 sharp edges that require a sizable amount of attention are restricting, quote, removable media, and the very prescriptively worded cert-based network access. Starting with the most visible, USB media, yes, just like phishing needs to be vigilantly guarded against with equal parts education and technical systems, people get flash drives at conferences and gym locker room floors and don't wear protection. The old decree that physical access is total access applies to stuff they can now infect iPads with, too. But this should be easy enough with the option of shipping encrypted drives to people, or rolling with a sensible vendor software implementation, should one ever exist and be within the reach of your org. There's a reason the Santa project has also implemented denying USB mass storage handling in its feature set. But the cert-based network access thing is a slippery slope of vendors and network admins and security personnel who are either unwilling or unable to give two craps about functional Macs, and historically poor hygiene in legacy model environments where being able to get on a network was a game over situation, or being identifiable on even a trusted network would similarly strike fear into the hearts of humans. Well, Beyond Corp came from the future with a message to rescue us with, and we mostly ignored it because the promise and implementation in very few frozen-in-time implementations of 802.1x was so platonically ideal. I think Google saying their Macs can't use Touch ID is a very weird threat model, and I mention that to reiterate it's outside my threat model to care about various things the specifics of what this control describes actually guards against, when it comes to if the juice is worth the squeeze. In fact, I challenge anyone else to claim they are truly Google important as a target, nation-statey. As a tangent, it would be great to tell all the lateral movement and OPSEC arguments standards designers try to force on us that all that malarkey is just theater. We shouldn't need to standardize and crush a whole bunch of identity and discovery options because of outdated thinking. But what I'm trying to say here is, at the very least, get ahead of the pain and see how network access, if you're particularly unlucky, your SSO provider's app access, can be sensibly integrated with stuff like Duo, if you can help it. Not that it's the best, but like Python, it's the second best for most jobs. And remember, everyone stubs their toe on 802.1x and networks and SAML and IAM and RBAC and such. Good luck and Godspeed. If you do find yourself stuck implementing dumb controls because of uncooperative or head-in-the-sand teams with political power in your org that want to implement Shutter, DLP, or stupid vuln scanning, or you get things you install silently wiped and exfiltrated by the people who are supposed to protect us, aka the machine learning, artificial intelligence, natural language processing, Formula 1, BMW, Lamborghini, next-gen bullshit security vendors, you at least won't be alone if you share your misery in the Regulatory Compliance channel in MacAdmin Slack. I originally had some snarky things to say about cloud security teams abdicating responsibility to the new Tier 0, which is DevOps becoming devs with an AWS account, because ain't that a thread running through a lot of my discontent. But before I run over time, I wanted to return to a theme from long ago from my far impersonal not friend Steven, as we share the obvious ability to defeat the world. With the cross-platform Event Hub and osquery/Santa config server I've been heavily involved with for a bit called Central. Have you heard of it? I invented the iPhone. Have you heard of it? Now, this certainly isn't a Central talk, but if you only thought of Central in terms of Santa and osquery, I wanted to hip you cool cats on a more recent development from the turn of the year, which is the integration of JMESPath. With it, Central can leverage the inventory data it coalesces between sources like Jamf or Monkey or Workspace ONE or Puppet, and makes the trees of structured data parsable in a JQ-ish style, but a bit more enterprise-grade weaponry. And here's an example of doing so if you're doing the less stringent auditing pattern I was referring to earlier where you can confirm a profile on an iOS device checking in with MDM. But you see at the beginning, it confirms the presence of that branch in the machine snapshot tree in the first place, so you definitely get a pass-fail instead of the third, quote, backstop state Central provides called unknown. Another more general purpose example, because again, this is about us reliably doing our jobs and getting health metrics we care about. You can also check for patched N-1 OS versions if your lockouts with Duo aren't going as intended, or you want to proactively do outreach before implementing a restriction. And another example, while this is less in service to a control, you could check for vulnerable versions of a deb package, for example. Why add overhead by pushing out a new clean way to format a response in osquery when the inventory source most likely already has it? And continuing the fun, in case you missed it, section, query packs from osquery have a concept of discovery queries, which similarly help differentiate VDI, virtual desktop infra, or conference room appliance type Mac minis with a different threat model, like maybe the appliance devices in a conference room don't need file vault, VDI maybe doesn't have a Windows manager. You can treat those models accordingly. If you're enforcing a whole file with Monkey or Puppet, all you essentially need to confirm it's exactly as configured by management, but even confirming key values are set and trusting the framework's response, we know is not bulletproof since there is drift before the OS actually locks the setting. But that's as close as we can hope for. I mean, here you go, more text on slides. Here's the real secret sauce that I got from the Grand Poobah, which I think is Eric Falconier's official title over at Central. Just like JMES path can definitely give a failing grade even if the key you're trying to traverse to confirm a specific value isn't present, left joining makes it so an ad hoc on-demand tables row with a null value and a coalesced fallback value tricks SQLite into returning a column for ZTL status to still have criteria to evaluate for a compliance check. The top example can even confirm multiple registry keys and values for the example of CIS control 5.1 where you want to disable password storage, and the bottom is another variation of the check where we just check in the hash. Central also enables a GitOps workflow due to the API endpoints and support for YAML or the specific JSON-alike collections of queries, where we can limit to a platform like POSIX if it was applicable across Macs and most Linux distros. And even a dumb person like me got that all hooked up via CI/CD, so any team internally can audit or contribute as needed, or just view them, just like our Santa rules. If we're being very thorough, we could be checking the service and the version and signature of the library / framework / executables in question, but again, tools like Santa and config management are purpose-built to enforce those things. The criteria built into the config management model of leveraging executable code, for example as Puppet facts, in order to know when it needs to idempotently act is awesome because Zentral also reads those, quote, extra facts into inventory, just like it does with champ-VAs or monkey facts to be parsed with JMS path. And that flexibility really fleshes out the complementary ends of an audit / remediation cycle for what I consider the gold standard until somebody shows me a better way to do it. I'm also still investigating what will stay or go for version 8, so shipping what we have now is more important. And that's it. Thank you for drinking from the fire hose and going the distance with me. I hope it was entertaining and that my coworkers know I definitely respect and appreciate them, and I'm looking forward to them and the auditors pointing out that I'm actually bad at computers. MDOYVR, thank you, I'm out.